Good morning and welcome to our online church service today. Thank you for joining us. Folks, as we try to keep community created, I am doing just a Zoom chat, just as a beginning exercise for us. I do them both on Wednesday, one at 9 a.m. that's coffee chat, and one at 5 p.m. that is happy hour. And that's Central Time. If you would like to get the Zoom coordinates, if you'll just email me, I will get that to you. Those of you that are on our mailing list, you are already getting those Zoom links as it is. We are going to continue to offer an abbreviated service online until the middle of October. We have sold our building and we'll be going back to just posting sermons until the pandemic is sufficiently over. Predictions now are that up to 400,000 Americans will die by the end of this year. And so we felt like even doing this abbreviated stuff with a minimal congregation might be more risky than it really should be. I had canceled all of my out-of-state speaking engagements for all of 2020, but the progressive group in, let me see if I can say it right, Malvern, England, would be Malvern if it was in the United States, has asked me to Zoom in that lecture. That will be October 8th. I'll have a Zoom link for that in a couple of weeks if you would like to be a part of that. It's a great group of people. They were the first ones to invite me to speak in the United Kingdom, and that sort of started my tradition of going over there every year and visiting several other spots. They have a conference called the Faith and Religion, or Faith and Science Conference, and so they're a pretty progressive group, especially for British people. They are still more traditional in terms of their worship styles and stuff than we are, but a great group of folks that I look forward to visiting with again. In terms of our own circumstances here, for those of you in the Springfield area that might be concerned, in the inspection on our building, we discovered that we had been miscounting our attendance for several months. A family of raccoons have been living in our attic and crawl space and have managed to do a great deal of damage to our building that we're going to have to fix up. But whatever the count has been, we should add 3 or 4 to that. And I regret to tell you that within a couple of weeks, they will be vacating the premises. So, but again, thank you all for joining us today.
Let's pray together. Acknowledging that we often grow tired of the painful truth about poverty, illness, racism, discrimination, environmental ruin, and warfare, we confess that we have escaped through distraction using food, entertainment, alcohol, and personal isolation. We regret most deeply that we have fashioned religions to mask reality, often blaming our cruel indifference on a divine being of our own creation. Liberate us from the darkness of ignorance and call us, we pray, into the light of truth, that we may be partners in working for peace and justice.
This is Blackbird by Paul McCartney. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life, you were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life, You were only waiting for this moment to be free. Blackbird fly, blackbird fly into the light of a dark black night. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.
What I have here this morning is not exactly a wisdom lesson, because it doesn't impart very much wisdom. But it comes from it's excerpted from a letter to our local paper entitled "The Confederate Flag Must Go to help reach equality." And so it's an argument against keeping and honoring any symbol, statuary, anything else that might honor the Confederacy. And the author of the letter says very briefly that his grandfathers, he said, well, great-grandfathers, were fought in the Confederate Army. He grew up with the idea that the Civil War was more about states' rights than slavery. And that is why he says he did some investigation and found an excerpt from the Declaration of the Immediate Causes which induce and justify the secession of the state of Mississippi from the federal union. And here's that excerpt from the Mississippi legislature in 1861. In the momentous step which our state has taken of dissolving its connection with the government of which we so long formed a part, it is but just that we should declare the prominent reasons which have induced our course. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. That blow has been long aimed at the institution, that is, at slavery, and was at the point of reaching its consummation. There was no choice left us but submission to the mandates of abolition or a dissolution of the Union, whose principles had been subverted to work out our ruin. And therefore, I think all this gives the lie to the old conundrum, the old chestnut, that the Civil War was not about slavery, that secession was not about slavery. Very clearly, that is not the case.
This is Maybe We'll All Get Along Someday by Joe Purdy. There's a man who wants the White House for his personal TV show. He wants his face on all the money. He wants his name on all the roads. Well, he says he can make us great again. He says that he knows how. He's gonna build a big wall, tall, and kick everybody out. It's just another reason that people can't get along. Picking sides in the USA. Well, treat me like a human. I'll treat you just the same. Maybe we can all get along someday. Well, they're changing up the districts to keep the white kids white, to keep the black kids poor, and Spanish speakers out. They say it's all equal, just like it used to be. Just stay on your side of town, with help just out of reach. It's just another reason that people can't get along, hanging on their same old ways. Treat me like a human, I'll treat you just the same. Maybe we can all get along someday. I don't know much about politics, don't know much about war, don't know much about killing or what all the killing's for. Don't know much about weapons, but it seems like common sense. The more bullets put in a rifle, the more that gets spent. It's just another reason that people can't get along, fighting over the American way. Treat me like a human, I'll treat you just the same. Maybe we can all get along someday. Maybe we can all get along someday. Maybe we can all get along someday.
I hail from a long line of clergy. It skipped a few generations at times, but we always seem to keep coming back to the family trade. I am a direct descendant of the Reverend John Rogers, the side of the family from which my first name was taken. John's career as an English clergyman came to a sudden end one day in 1555 when Mary Queen of Scots had him burned alive at the stake. An event which evidently put the desire to go to seminary on ice in my family for several generations. But always the rebels, it was Edmund Rogers who found after the call of Cromwell that it was a really good time for him to get out of town and to leave the island nation which had been my patriarchal home. Edmund Rogers distinguished himself in service during the Revolutionary War, and after the war settled to a farm in southern Kentucky, founding the small town that still bears his name, Edmonton, Kentucky. For more than 2 centuries, my patriarchal family managed a large farm there, and for most of the first half of it, it was a prosperous slave plantation. I grew up near there, hearing stories about the good old days before the Civil War plunged my family into poverty. 100 years after the war, I sat in the old plantation house living room listening to my father and uncles repeating stories that included a great deal of apologetics for the kind of people that our family was in the 19th century. My great-grandmother, Nina Biggs, published her last book when she was 102, corresponded with me regularly about the history of the Civil War, and she informed me that she had been cared for as an infant by a former slave who did not leave the family service at the end of the war because they were happy being slaves. I helped to mow the family cemetery where slaves were buried in a corner of the family graveyard. I went to school with black kids who had my family name, and we assumed that they were the descendants of the freed slaves from my family plantation. What I did not allow myself to consider until many years later is that they were probably also my cousins. In high school, my history teachers told us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery. The real issue, we were told, is that the South had traditionally produced the raw materials for the industrialized northern states But when the southern states began to industrialize, to process and weave their own cotton and wool, that it was an economic threat to the North, and so the Yankees attacked us. I was told in history class by my teachers that slavery was only used as a cover for what they called the War of Northern Aggression. A monument to our Confederate dead still stands on the courthouse lawn in my hometown. I published in the Glasgow Daily Times a few years ago, urging my hometown peers to move this monument off of the courthouse lawn so it wouldn't be a reflection of government, and to put it on a Civil War cemetery near the square. That newspaper column generated more death threats than anything I have published in the last 30 years. And a very intense letter from my brother, who still lives in Glasgow, imploring me to never ever write for the Glasgow Daily Times again. The myth is that such memorials represent Southern heritage. The claim is made that it's not about racism at all. It's just about our culture, our history. These statues and memorials represent our pride in our ancestors, and through them we honor their memory. It is all a part of the fabric of the myth that descendants of slave owners created for themselves. That myth normalized the Southern culture of which slavery was a part in much the same way that turning corn into bourbon and eating grits with your eggs is just what it meant to be from that part of the country. Of course, then comes along a history teacher like our own Dr. David Adams, who read our wisdom lesson today, directly reading from the Mississippi State Legislature's 1861 Declaration of Secession from the Union, which very plainly gives the lie to the myth about the causes of the Civil War, stating plainly, our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world. Arguing imperiously that products of the agricultural South were crucial to the whole world, but explaining none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. Saying in effect, well, you know, we don't want to be slave owners. It's just that you can't expect white folk to do that work. The historical fact is that the Civil War was about slavery. It's also a historical fact that almost all of these statues were not put up at the end of the war to honor those who had surely been traitors to the United States, but they were erected during the Jim Crow era along with the rise of the KKK. More were added during the Civil Rights Movement, always as an assertion by the white majority that equal rights would never be given to black people. But it became a part of the background of Southern life. White people had the luxury of displaying Dixie flags and talking endearingly about the South as if the myths were true, and there was no harm in our history of slavery. Even as recently as 1989, the generally liberal singing trio, now named the Chicks, were known as the Dixie Chicks. For nearly 30 years, they wore that name. And I'm not sure that the new name would pass muster with many feminists these days. The Chicks doesn't sound all that woke to me. But even with the problems of that moniker, they didn't ever want to be referred to as the Dixie Chicks anymore. I'm sure that many people would now write off all of this movement to ban Confederate flags, to tear down Confederate monuments, and even to scrub the language of references to the Confederacy that helped to hide the horrors of our early history in slavery as a matter of political correctness, of liberals trying to change history, or even a kind of cancel culture. But the truth is that symbols and statues and flags and universities and military bases and bridges and streets, the names make a difference. if you cannot immediately see the connection between the culture that accepts these Confederate monuments in our midst and the fact that a white cop is willing to put 7 bullets in the back of a black man, then I hope you will see it before you leave here today. There is a reason why the police drove right past 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, even though he was out after curfew, he was carrying a weapon that was illegal for him to have, and he had just shot and killed 2 people, and the police literally nodded at him as people around were shouting at the police that this guy was the shooter who had just shot a couple of people. But the police will shoot an unarmed black man in the back even when they pose no threat, because they simply, inherently, from the air we breathe, do not see a black person the same way as they see a white person. If you still don't see the connection to the fixtures of institutional racism, to the way that black people are treated by employers, in the courts, and by law enforcement, then let me now try to fix your glasses. Why is there so much resistance to things like changing the name of the Edmund Pettus Bridge to the John Lewis Bridge? I mean, other than Dr. Adams, is there anyone here that even knows who Edmund Pettus was, beyond the fact that he was a part of the Confederacy? Lots of people fought in the Civil War, but Pettus got a bridge named after him in Alabama because he was also one of the first grand dragons of the KKK. Now, that's part of Alabama history for sure, but not an especially good part. Not something that should get your name on a public works project. Now, there are things that are undeniably part of history that don't deserve a public monument. Mary, Queen of Scots, played a very significant role in my family history. But even 500 years after she had Reverend John Rogers burned alive, I don't need a portrait of her hanging in my living room to remind me of what this Catholic anti-Reformationist did. She was 13 years old when she ordered Reverend Rogers taken from prison and burned alive. Who gives that kind of power to a hormonal teenager? You don't have to be mad for me. I'm mad enough for all of us. But you can see why I'm kind of frosted after 500 years, when even the Scots never raised a statue in memory of Mary, Queen of Scots. About 4 years ago, someone did put one up. And for my Scottish listeners, let me just say, the fact that I happen to be in country when that monument is torn down has no connection. It wasn't me. But I digress. Back to the topic at hand. I think that the final word in the argument about taking these Confederate statues down was published in the New York Times on June 26th in a piece written by Vanderbilt professor Carolyn Randall Williams. I don't normally read a passage from someone else's pen this long, but I need for you to hear just a few paragraphs from Professor Williams' essay. She writes, "I have rape-colored skin. My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, and the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, if they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. Dead Confederates are honored all over this country with cartoonish private statues, solemn public monuments, and even the names of United States Army bases. It fortifies and heartens to me to witness the protest against the practice and the growing clamor from serious, nonpartisan public servants to redress it. But there are still those, like President Donald Trump and the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who cannot understand the difference between rewriting and reframing the past. I say it's not a matter of airbrushing history, but a matter of a new perspective. I am a black Southern woman, and my immediate white male ancestors, all of them, were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow. I am the descendant of black women who were domestic servants and white men who raped their help. I am more than half white, and none of it was consensual. White Southern men, my ancestors, took what they wanted from women they did not love, over whom they had extraordinary power, and then failed to claim their children. What is a monument but a standing memory, an artifact to make tangible the truth of the past? My body and blood are a tangible truth of the South and its past. The black people I come from were owned by the white people I come from. The white people I come from fought and died for their lost cause. And I ask you now, who dares tell me to celebrate them? Who dares to ask me to accept their mounted pedestals? You cannot dismiss me as someone who doesn't understand. You can't say it wasn't my family members who fought and died. My blackness does not put me on the other side of anything. It puts me squarely at the heart of the debate. I don't just come from the South, I come from Confederates. I've got rebel gray blue blood coursing in my veins. My great-grandfather Will was raised with the knowledge that Edmund Pettus was his father. Pettus, the storied Confederate general, the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, the man for whom Selma's Bloody Sunday Bridge is named. So I'm not an outsider who makes these demands. I'm a great-great-granddaughter. So far as I'm concerned, Professor Williams has said the last thing that needs to be said on this topic. There is no defense. There is no excuse for the public display of Confederate monuments. The Confederates were traitors who sought to defend the institution of slavery in a country that had the temerity to speak of freedom and liberty as the reasons for its existence. As a white man in America, while my family has boasted many scholars, scientists, and many pastors, I cannot dare speak of the fact without also apologizing for the undeniable fact that my bloodlines also contain slave owners, slave traders, and probably slave rapists. There is no way to go back in time to undo the tragic, unjust, criminal, and immoral events. There is no way that any self-respecting white person in this country should not be the first in line to hold on to the rope that pulls down Confederate monuments. This is not a black issue. This is a white crime. Their history of human chattel slavery, physical abuse, and undeniable rape is a part of our history, but it is a part for which we must apologize and do everything we can to make amends. It is interesting, isn't it, that when people like me object to police shooting unarmed black men, especially shooting them in the back, that people think we are being critical of the police in general. Is shooting unarmed black men so much a part of policing that people seriously can't separate the two? They can't conceive of policing without shooting unarmed black men in the back? The fact that people can't seem to imagine objecting to the police excessive use of lethal force without objecting to the police entirely is why we have to make deep cultural changes. It means that we have to change the way we talk. It means that we have to change the way we name army bases, universities, and streets. And when someone says Black Lives Matter, don't ever reply with some inane Blue Lives Matter, or worse yet, All Lives Matter. If someone tells you that their mother just died, do you correct them and say, all mothers die? We announce that Black Lives Matter because that has not been very clear over the past 400 years of American history. And we pull down Confederate monuments because while the Confederacy is a part of our heritage, it is a part of our history in the same way that the Nazis and the Holocaust are part of German history. And while there may be some right-wing German groups that would love to put up a statue of Hitler, the German people know to keep telling those racist nuts to sit down and shut up. So in that spirit, all that is left to say to those among us who still defend Confederate flags or the Dixie store down in Branson or Confederate monuments and names, let me say this in the nicest way that I know how. I want you to sit down and shut up. And if you think telling people to sit down and shut up isn't all that nice, let me invite you to imagine what I might have said if we were not in church. This case, men and women, is closed.
This is We've Come Too Far to Turn Around by Charles Lloyd and the Marvels. We are weary of these trials, of tribulations. We are tired, but we have come too far to turn around. From the city of Atlanta to Birmingham, Alabama, we have come too far to turn around. And we are here to bear witness to this monstrous sickness. We have come too far to turn around. And we have stared into the eyes of evil. We have slow danced with the devil. We have sit down at his table and shared with him in the feast. We've been victims of his wrath. We've wavered from the path, but we have come too far to turn around. We will lay down the burden of hate and separation, 'cause we have come too far to turn around. For over 400 years we've been on this trail of tears. We have come too far to turn around. And we have swallowed the liquid of his lies, tolerated the ones we despise, been led astray by his disguise, fooled by his beliefs. We are weary of these trials, of tribulations. We are tired, but we have come too far to turn around.
Ruth King, a psychologist, mindfulness teacher, and racial justice activist, teaches us what is unfinished is reborn. And as Roger has again pointed out, the United States has a lot that's unfinished. And we carry those open wounds in our history, in our institutions, in our cultures, and even in our own hearts and our own families. The pain and suffering of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and so much more are continually reborn. And if we don't want that to be the case, we have to finish the work. And that is just what we do. When we gather, when we go home, whenever and however and wherever we live our lives, we live in such a way that brings these injustices to an end. We are committed together to finish the work. And that is what we mean when we say, go in peace, to love and to serve.
Thank you.